In January of this year, Qiao Collective put out a post highlighting the differences between the US and China's relief deployment strategies, as revealed by their contrasting responses to natural disasters, comparing the devastating wildfires in Greater Los Angeles and the 7.1 earthquake that struck in China's Zhejiang, Tibet autonomous region the day before. I found this really interesting. And to quote from this Instagram post, while LA's response was appallingly inadequate and militarized, China's state response was swift and effective in deploying aid and civil defense workers. Can you expand on the differences and offer some insight into why China's response was more effective?
Sure, absolutely. I guess to preface this, I will say that, I am based in the LA area myself and in fact in Pasadena. So I personally did have to evacuate from the Eaton fire and was displaced for about a month and a half due to toxic ash buildup, during which time my comrades and I were heavily involved in mutual aid efforts. And so a lot of this is coming from direct personal experience. But what was sort of immediately obvious, well before the fires were remotely contained, was that the immediate emergency response had been systematically defunded, in particular the fire department in Los Angeles, in favor of raising the police budget. So this created a situation where, there simply was not the capacity even for the most immediate task of attempting to contain the fires, and where the city and municipal authorities had to rely heavily on state firefighters, a third of whom are in fact de facto enslaved prisoners. This is a phenomenon that I think attained a lot more visibility during these fires was the fact that so many firefighters at the state level in California are in fact incarcerated and work for around like $5 a day. Beyond the immediate firefighting efforts, the state also had very little capacity for initial search, rescue, or cleanup efforts. As for evacuation, it was very unsystematic, and attempts at rescuing people and property were sort of almost fully decentralized and individualized during the initial phases of the fires. The cleanup efforts, which is where a lot of our energies went to in the immediate aftermath of the fires, fell very much on grassroots mutual aid efforts. And the scale of this was truly impressive, but it was also quite telling that the state itself had to actually turn to these grassroots efforts for supplies. It did not even have at its own disposal the means for a much more large scale cleanup effort. And this presented to us a very striking contrast with the state response to the earthquake in the Xizang or Tibet autonomous region, which coincidentally had been less than 24 hours before the fires broke out here in LA. In China's Xizang or Tibet region, you had within 36 hours complete restoration of all electricity, communications, and transport infrastructure. You had the mobilization of 10,000 civil defense workers, and within a day, basically, they'd combed through the entirety of the rubble and rescued all survivors. So the contrast is immediate. And as for, what the roots of it are, I think the most important thing to bring up is that we have in the United States a very atomized society, a very atomized, individualized body politic. And there truly is no counterpart at scale to the Chinese state and Communist Party's whole of society capacity for mobilization and crisis response, which of course was also on full view during the COVID lockdowns, when the structure of the Communist Party, its sort of embedding within virtually all walks of life, served to implement really at all levels a mobilizing effort, the scale of which is truly remarkable. And, the only comparable entities in terms of the capacity to mobilize the energies of people at short notice and of their own accord here in the US are these relatively small, fully volunteer run mutual aid efforts that are not that easy to coordinate at the scale, even of a large urban area like LA, to say nothing of an entire national scale effort. And of course, as I mentioned, these grassroots networks are by and large co-opted, ignored, or in some cases actively repressed by the state.